Before we get started, a quick note. If you haven't yet, please listen to episodes 2 through 4 in this season on Learning to Change, where we tell the stories of 3 groups who've modeled our season theme. We had to cut so much good stuff out to create those stories, so now we're releasing extended cuts of the individual interviews. We hope you'll like them as much as we do, and that they lead you to a richer appreciation for what it means to learn to change.
This is Climate Conversations by Climate X.
Today we're going to be talking with Vanessa Rule, who is the co-founder of Mothers Out Front and also the director of Learning and Expansion for Mothers Out Front.
You might hear our producer Dave chiming in here. Here's Vanessa.
So I'm Vanessa Rule. I'm the co-founder and Learning and Expansion Director for Mothers Out Front. Also co-founder of Better Future Project and 350 Massachusetts. I've been organizing on climate change for 11 years now.
Could we go back on one aspect of your title, your role, Mothers Up Front? It was expansion. What was it?
Learning and expansion.
Yeah.
You want to know what that's about?
I'd love to hear more about learning and expansion, because that's...
And how are they tied together?
Awesome.
Right. So expansion is how do we go to scale, right? How do we grow beyond our existing states?
So you just moved to California, got things going in San Jose and other places in California?
California is going to be turning into what we call a deep organizing state, so that has staff on the ground. And I've been working with moms in between 6 and 8 other states in the last year and a half who've wanted to get involved, but just working with them remotely, which has been a really interesting learning experience. As a community organizer, organizing is all about relationships and sort of face-to-face interactions and being right in the thick of it in terms of the strategy piece. And so, talking to people 3,000 miles away and figuring out how to support them to do this has been a really different approach. And so one of the things we're trying to figure out is the balance between depth and breadth in building power, where you need people that are moving policy in a very concrete way, and that you need, a lot of power for that. You need deep organizing and a lot of resources to make that happen. But we also know part of the strategy is to shift the cultural narrative within which change is possible, right? And so decision makers are looking at what's politically feasible within a cultural context. And so there's the, getting sort of those concrete policy wins, but also changing people's relationship to climate change and what's possible.
Could you go back on the depth and breadth thing for a moment?
Sure.
And just say a little bit more about what those constitute. What's the depth? What's the breadth?
Depth is one of the questions that you'd asked me was, at what scale do we operate? And, basically we need a global transition. But our understanding is, we have the experts, we understand the problem, we know what we need to do to address the climate crisis. What we don't have is political will. In order to do that, we need to move decision makers and we need to build political power. And the scale at which you do that is very local because it depends on people's ability to build relationships with each other, to experience agency together. So they need to be able to find things that they can actually get results on. They need to learn to organize, and that takes a lot of leadership development. It takes a lot of learning. And at the same time, there are mothers all over the country who are ready to jump on and say, we need our voices heard. And so the breadth is really about just giving mothers a voice. But we know just giving people a voice isn't going to change. It's not going to necessarily result in concrete change at the policy level. So really utilizing the interface between those two things of winning those concrete political wins and then just, I always think of, I don't know if it's a good analogy, but the Tea Party did a really great job there, or just mobilizing people to be really loud, right, in these town meetings. And
we should be learning from everybody here, right?
Yes, yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the leadership development and learning activities that you've been involved with or are happening right now that reflect what you've been saying.
The people that we work with, they call themselves unsuspecting activists, right? Mothers who have never done any kind of political activism or organizing, who, it turns out, many of them have felt alone and isolated and paralyzed by the sense of overwhelm. And so the first step is to create community so they're not feeling alone and realizing that they can work together to affect change. But then there are, tried and true organizing skills that, social movements have drawn on for, the history of time. And, like knowing how to have a one-to-one conversation with somebody to find out what they're interested in and see sort of where your interests match and how to get them involved, learning how to tell your story, learning how to develop a strategy, learning how to organize a rally. So there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of risk-taking, I think, for a lot of people as they grow. And so one of the most gratifying things about this work to me is seeing people's lives transform through the work, that they do together, both in terms of realizing that they don't have to figure this out alone and that there's incredible hope in working together, but also in discovering things they never thought they could do, right? The number of people who've said, like, I never thought I could do public speaking. I never thought I'd, go and talk to my elected officials. I never thought, I'd be running a training or, building a team. And I've had members, mothers up front say to me, like, this has been like going back to college, or it's opened up these pathways that I didn't even know were possible.
Any examples come to mind that really illustrate right now what's happening in that learning space and growing and transforming for members of Mothers Out Front?
I mean, it's happening all the time, right? So like when Kelsey and I started, the first question was, is it even possible to engage mom on this issue? And I was telling you earlier that I didn't come to doing this work as a mother, even though my kids were 3 and 6 when I started. And because within my group of friends of mothers, it was a really unpopular topic, right? It was the downer conversation. Like nobody wanted to touch that thing. Yeah. So I was not sure, how when Kelsey showed up and said, hey, I think, I'm a mother. The reason I'm doing this is because I think about my children and there must be other mothers out there. The question was, how are people going to respond and how do we get them to, step away from their incredibly busy lives to get involved? And I mean, it feels like we've tapped into this untapped gold mine, right? And it's about giving people a viable pathway for action and then connecting them to each other. And then they learn together. So a huge part of our learning approach is to create conditions for learning. And, we have some ideas and some tried and true practices, but everything we do involves a reflective piece. So every meeting ends, every Mothers Out Front meeting ends with what we call pluses, deltas, and key learnings. What went well about this meeting? What would you change to make it better next time? And what's one thing you learned? And, that's like every meeting all the way to a major action. So there's this constant idea that we're figuring this out together, that there isn't, tried and true path or formula.
There's no handbook that you can pull off the shelf and say, okay, now we're at step 2.
I'm trying to write it, but it keeps getting rewritten. It's like every time we move to a new state, or a new community, it's like people are bringing their resources and their life experiences and different insights that enrich our approach. So it's constantly evolving. So one of the challenges is capturing those learnings and then figuring out what can you codify and going back to expansion and replicate, and what do you need to sort of honor as I think it's more like the process as opposed to the content.
You can't necessarily fast forward every group. They have to start where they are and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So part of how we encourage learning is through the process of coaching, and that's a scary word for some people, but there's always somebody we talk about coaching as, being the fish out of the fishbowl. Like you don't know you're in water if you're in water. And so having that sort of person asking you questions to get you to sort of, connect the dots is a really important part of the process. And that connects back to the leadership development.
I was wondering if we could go back in time before Mothers Out Front.
Yeah.
You have a history of working on these issues that definitely predates, right? Take us back before Mothers Out Front. What did doing this work look like?
Well, I think it was probably very similar to what a lot of people feel when they start getting involved in Mothers Out Front, which was I thought I had to do it all by myself and that I thought I had to have all the solutions and all the answers, right? But I had the instinct that I couldn't do it by myself. So I went and, I saw Inconvenient Truth, and it scared the living hell out of me. And for whatever reason, that spoke to me in a way that I think doesn't necessarily to most people. But my reaction was just to go find people in my community who were working on this and approached it from a very rational, technical perspective, which was, this is, we have too many emissions, and so we need to transition off fossil fuels, and this is a technological problem. So I was leading a group called Somerville Climate Action, and we divided the sort of the city's carbon footprint into the different sectors and developed a strategy for working with each sector to draw down. And then it became clear that that wouldn't cut it in terms of the rate at which the science was, evolving and the data was coming in. And then 350.org made it clear that this was a political problem, not a technical problem. And so I learned about movement building, and my entry there was actually through a group of students called Students for a Just and Stable Future, who said, well, 350 is a great goal, but how are we going to get there? And they said, we're right before the Copenhagen 2009 UN Climate Summit, said we're going to call on the Massachusetts legislature to meet, all of electricity needs 100% by 2050 with renewable energy. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to protest having to sleep in dorms and homes powered by fossil fuels, and we're going to pitch tents on the Boston Common, sleep outside in protest, and then put on business attire on Monday morning and walk into the State House and say, we need to transition. And so I joined that, and, the students really led the way for me and opened that door to movement building.
So there's this kind of pre-mothers out front way of looking at movement building.
Yep.
Could you say a little bit more, kind of summarize like what that looks like for people who haven't been part of one of these organizations?
Yeah, so it's about developing leadership in others. And, I'm drawing a lot of what I'm sharing here is actually drawn from the work of Marshall Gans at the Harvard Kennedy School, who has, looked at the best practices in organizing history and developed his own framework and codified it and now teaches a class. But he defines leadership as enabling others to take action in the face of uncertainty, I think. Yeah. And so it really is about enabling others. And, when we talk about the paradigm shift, or sort of how do you build political will, it's really changing our understanding and our relationship to power, from power over to power with, and the idea that you have experts at the top who are going to have the solutions and that you need to trust them to do that. And shifting from that paradigm to the idea that it is in coming together and trusting ourselves and having the agency, the collective agency to create the future or the world that we want.
But you're not saying science and technology is not an important piece of the overall
but that's not the missing piece of the puzzle right now, right? So we have science and technology. What we don't have, we have incredibly powerful special interests at the decision-making table that are representing one set of interests, and what we need is to have more people at the table, because the more perspectives you have at the table, the better decisions you make, right? And so right now, most decision makers really aren't working to put the interest of children first. And if they were, they would be making really different decisions. So our job is to represent, those kids who don't have a voice, and to make sure that their interests are represented as we make,
What's an example of right now what 2018 that Mothers Out Front is doing in that regard to bring this children's perspectives or future generations' perspectives to the table?
I mean, every campaign we run, has that perspective. And so, it's pretty wonky stuff, honestly, which is the other incredible thing about Mothers Out Front, is that we've gotten, people really interested in things like fossil fuel infrastructure and things like community choice energy, which are these sophisticated, mechanisms to try to reduce emissions.
So any campaign that Mothers Out Front is doing reflects that, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we're acting with our voices, right, as mothers, and bringing that voice into the decision-making room, which it really hasn't been. And in terms of the overall climate movement, we found that when people talk about climate change, first of all, they connect it to the environment. They don't talk about people much, or certainly not children. And that really changes the dynamics. So having mothers show up as opposed to, environmentalists, quote unquote, or students, is a really different experience, I think, for a lot of politicians.
Is there a recent hearing or something that you were involved with, or some others out front, where that perspective came to the fore?
Yeah, so our mothers are really, really good at telling their stories. And, we coach them and train them in telling their stories and really speaking. So one of the things we've learned is that facts are a lot less compelling than stories and people relating to each other as human beings. And so mothers talking about, what this is going to mean for their children and why they're involved and making it really granular and, making it real, basically. It's definitely a tactic that we use a lot. And just having moms, show up at hearings and there are hearings every day. There was one in Boston last week. Honestly, I can't remember.
Could be the city level, could be town level, could be state level, could be federal, any level.
Not
really.
federal at this point,
Not
but
federal.
yeah, city
Okay.
and state.
So you talked about this kind of mindset shift from power over into power with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what that shift was like for you. Is that hard? Or do you remember when that kind of clicked for you? Or was that something you kind of came to the table with and are trying to talk about more?
I think it was always intuitive at some level, but it wasn't articulated. And, we talk about organizing is about making the implicit explicit. And that's what a lot of what we do in terms of learning, right? It's like all this stuff is something that human beings do, I think, naturally, but becoming very aware of how you use sort of those approaches explicitly and being strategic about it is what we do. So I remember, I think it was like the policy director from 350.org I was having coffee with at one point, and I was saying, what do we need to do in Massachusetts to sort of really step it up? And he said, we need more of you, right? You need to go find other people and develop their leadership instead of trying to be the leader or holding on to power. And that's I think a real transformation that people go through when they get involved is, everything from sitting at a house party and seeing people's light bulbs go off when we say, you don't have to solve this problem by yourself, and we're going to figure it out together. And the palpable relief in the room, I think, is one of the things that allows people to get involved, because I think that's one of the reasons people are so paralyzed. And, our biggest enemy, honestly, is fear and the sense of not feeling like you can act. Once you get people to act, you realize that it actually doesn't take that much to get those decision makers to move. That's been one of the biggest surprises for me. I remember the first time I walked into the State House after sleeping out on the Boston Common with the students, and, they taught me how to lobby my legislator. And, it's the people's house. But there's that division there.
How do you lobby your legislator?
Well, you need to be really clear. You need to have an ask, right? A lot of the time they don't know anything about the issue. So, shifting from these people, again, are the power holders and the experts, to realizing they actually need you. The number of legislators and municipal officials who have said to us, we've been waiting for you. We've been wanting to do this, but we are not empowered to, literally. And there's no way they can know, all the things they need to know what to do. And so, we're not necessarily the experts, but it really helps for them to be able to turn during a hearing to the 100 mothers that have packed the room to say, it's not me that's pushing this, it's them.
The mothers made me do it.
They did, right. And listen to your mother.
What politician can be against mothers, right?
Right. And I think the other thing we've seen, going back to sort of how we're leveraging, I don't know if it's the interest, but is somebody last night at a dinner of mothers actually was talking about the cockroach effect, that if you see 2 cockroaches, there are a whole bunch more somewhere in your kitchen. And it's sort of the same thing with the mothers, where if you have 5 mothers who show up at a hearing, there are about 100, right, who couldn't make it because they're, at work or they're carpooling or whatever they're doing.
Childcare duties or...
Yeah, so I think, when legislators and elected officials see mothers show up, they take notice, because they understand that we actually do have the power to decide whether or not they're going to stay in office down the road. And, so the fossil fuel industry has a lot of money, but we have votes. We also have some money. And then we have our voices, and that's really powerful in changing people's consciousness.
You've talked a bunch about this awakening of empowerment in people, and I think that's a theme that's going to be touching on a lot of our episodes across this season. I wonder if you could think of a moment in your life where you woke up to that potential or watch somebody else wake up to it, and just kind of talk us through a sort of story about that. Got anything come to mind there?
Well, there's a mother who lives in Cambridge, actually, and she tells the story about it. She came to a house party I facilitated like within the first 3 months, and then we held a house party facilitation training because we wanted mothers to, be able to facilitate house parties. And she thought she was coming to training just to learn how to host a house party. And she found herself in this training, like learning to be a house party facilitator. And
what's the difference between hosting and facilitating?
Well, opening your home and just, basically saying, hey, feel free to meet in my living room and using the space, providing snacks, but letting somebody else actually do the talking.
Got it.
What we were teaching her was how to do the talking and sort of being in the front of the room. And she said that, she was terrified, but her instinct was just to say yes. And that's been her experience over and over and over again, right? That, the organizer would come to her and say, would you, speak at this rally? Would you, lead a team? Would you do this? And it just keeps saying yes and taking those baby steps and realizing that there are other mothers who've done this and that you don't need to be an expert. All you need to do is be a mom. And not that all you need to do is be a mom, but there's a lot that comes with that. And it's just about putting one step in front of the other and just following in other people's tracks. And so she's now coaching moms in California and other parts of the country. And, one of the things she says to them is just, I'm just one step ahead of you. And just that connection and that reassurance, just, a lot of people just need courage. Like they know what to do once they believe they can do it. But it's shifting from, again, that place of powerlessness and like other people have the answers, they're experts out there, to realizing that like we're the leaders we've been waiting for.
Yeah. I can't think of anything more necessary in this situation.
Right. I think a lot of people are giving up, given sort of the state of the world. And that's, to me, that's one of the most, that's what keeps me up at night because, and how do you convince people that it actually doesn't take that much. They don't need to drop their whole lives. They don't need to do anything heroic. But what's heroic is actually choosing to do something. And it really doesn't take that much. I mean, just in the city of Cambridge, I don't know whether Zainab told you this story.
Zainab McGaffey.
Yeah, who you spoke to. So they started by asking households to switch to clean energy, on their utility bill to say, we're going to, choose renewables because you have that option. And then they got 100 households to do that. They went to, I think, most Cambridge City councilors and said, we are doing this for our kids. This really matters to us. We're going to ask you to do the same thing. This is the right thing for you to do as a leader. We don't want you to stop at your own household. We want you to switch the city of Cambridge to clean energy. And they learned that the city of Cambridge had a municipal electricity contract with TransCanada, which is a company that exploits the tar sands and was behind building the Keystone XL pipeline. And so they found one city councilor who became a champion and sort of said, this is great, I'd love to support you on this, and who showed them the ropes, and they put forth a resolution at City Council to ask the mayor to break the contract with TransCanada and build a whole campaign around that. We're successful, and now they're, and I think the mayor committed to transitioning this. They did break the contract, and they're going to transition to 100% renewable generated within the city of Cambridge in 2 years. So that's a micro example, and you think, okay, how's this going to affect climate change? But if you're doing that in communities all over the country, all of a sudden you have a movement that's able to shift, things at the state level and then at the national level.
Yeah. Can you break down what happened in Cambridge just a little bit more for me? Like, how long did it take from this like original idea to? Frankly,
I don't know the details, but I think it was pretty quick. I mean, in terms of, it took them a while to get traction. They were one of our first teams. So again, going back to learning, the San Jose, California team did something similar where they were sort of the tipping point on a campaign around this thing called community choice energy that basically gets a municipality to put in a certain amount of renewable energy, that customers get in the city in its portfolio. Mm-hmm. And this fight, the divided city council had been going on for 6 years, and the moms showed up in their T-shirts with their kids. They had the kids testified, they testified, and within the span of a few months, it was done. Like, they had unanimous vote because the city councilors didn't want to come out against the mothers and the kids. So it's pretty magical.
Yeah. It's unlike a lot of the experiences I've had trying to push these things along. So I am so inspired by hearing some of the things that your group's done.
What do you think the difference is?
That's a fascinating question. It's one that kind of keeps me awake at night. What's the difference? I try to go in and tell my story, why this is important to me.
Do you do it by yourself?
I don't think I'm nearly as organized as you all. I mean, I'm part of 350 Mass, so I'm usually got a few colleagues in there with me. But I'm just thinking about the city of Cambridge has this contract, and you want us to rip that whole thing out and completely change? Oh, that's going to take a long time,
Well, if I think about 350 Mass, I think one of the things that Mothers Up Front does is it acts very locally, which is counterintuitive, right? So there's a sweet spot where individual actions are important, but we know that we're not going to solve things that way because the problem is we need to change the rules of the game, right? And we need decision makers to make different rules. So it's not going to be enough for us to just change our behavior. And then if you go too high, too fast, you just don't have the power, right? So in Massachusetts, our first campaign, we were helping moms get households to switch as an expression of our political will. Just sort of like, Cesar Chavez got people to boycott grapes. That was our equivalent. But what we did was we went to Governor Patrick to ask him to sign an executive order that would have banned any new fossil fuel infrastructure in the state. And we had 2 meetings with him. And both times he said, I'm behind you, but you don't have the numbers. Show me the numbers. And so we didn't win that first campaign. And what we learned from that was we just hadn't built enough power, right? And where you build the power is very much in your community because winning is contagious or it's addictive, right? So that Cambridge team doing that emboldened other teams, and that there are stories like that, all over Massachusetts and beyond. And so it's sort of counterintuitive, but you actually have to start small to grow big. Yeah.
Well, you're getting into another thing I wanted to touch on, which is how do you share the successes in one of your local groups more broadly? It feels like that's a key part of solving the bigger challenge here. We've got groups doing great things and innovative things. How do we scale that up?
Developing a movement, I think, is what you were talking about.
Yeah, so sharing the stories, I think, is really critical. So, increasingly, one of the things that I've been doing on expansion has been to bring mothers from different states together, right, to talk about those stories and sort of having this vision of, they did this in this place, and here, that's very inspiring and emboldening to mothers who are starting to do it somewhere else. So definitely, again, bringing people together and, creating that cross-fertilization. We have a lot of group meetings, where team leaders come together every couple of weeks or once a month to share their stories. And when a team sort of locks into something and figures something out, it's like, what did you do there? And then other people start replicating it. And so sort of a self-organizing, every team is sort of an incubator, and they all have different strengths. So, every Mothers Up Front team innovates in some way and in a way that other teams can just pick up on. So
I'm getting a sense that this is almost all volunteer driven, right?
It is.
People must be
We say volunteer led.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Must be a lot of time going into this, though. Do you have the sense that you get more time per week out of people than your typical advocacy group?
Yeah, I think we have the equivalent of 42 staff in full-time equivalent staff in volunteer hours a year. So the average, I think, I actually don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but something, between 1 and 20 hours a week. Now, there are some real equity issues with that because a lot of the people who can afford to give time are often, wealthier folk. And so, we're really compensating on that front to make sure that we're investing, staff resources into marginalized communities or communities that don't have, the same resources.
What's an example of that?
Right now we're working in Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is really sort of ground zero for sea level rise. It's
Sure. They're having sunny day floods and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, and a place where they don't talk about climate change, they talk about, or sea level rise, they talk about recurrent flooding, where there's just been systematic oppression of communities and relatively little civic engagement. I mean, New England is really, Massachusetts is very privileged in that way, right, that people are not, it's not that big a lift to get people to walk into City Hall and tell their stories. In communities that have traditionally, been oppressed, it's a whole different thing. So, I think one of the things that's amazing about what we're doing is we're working on climate change, but really we're rebuilding democracy, and sort of getting people to change their relationship to power and realize that they should have a voice, and they have a voice if they come together and organize. And that, moving from being alone and vulnerable to coming together and realizing you can take on Goliath that way.
It sounds also like you're customizing it to each local situation. Hampton Roads is different than Boston.
Yeah, so that's the other interesting thing about Mothers Out Front. When I worked at the very local level, when I started doing climate work, we had some national organizations that would come in and have an agenda and say, well, this is really interesting what you're doing, but really, if you want to do something meaningful, work on my national campaign. And that made me crazy. I hated that so much.
Okay.
Because I felt like, we were having a great time. We were innovating. We were doing some really interesting work. And I think one of the things I love about Mothers Out Front is that we're going to scale, but in a way that truly honors local decision-making and trusting that people have the resources and the knowledge that they need to get there. So, the way we work is we sort of there's a goal, which is we want to transition off fossil fuels as swiftly, justly, and completely as possible. And then, within that, how do you get there is going to really look different based on the local conditions.
What's the near future look like in terms of expansion, getting the learnings from one place to another, that sort of thing?
So a lot of our work is based on the 2008 Obama campaign. And there's a great book called Groundbreakers.
That's the way it was organized,
yes.
the campaign.
Yeah. Well, really the model that we're using, which is about building local teams and a lot of the organizing skills, teaching people how to, do one-to-one meetings to recruit each other and set up teams, develop, sort of goals and do all the work that they need to do to win. And electoral organizing is really different from issue organizing because, electoral, it's really clear what the goal is. With us, it's what is it going to take? We're not totally sure. But one of the things about that story is, every state they would learn something, and so the next state would be that much more sophisticated. And I don't mean to say that the first, but it's every state we go into, we've learned that much more. And so we're starting just a little further ahead.
Building on the shoulders of the folks that have already tried it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. So I'm super excited about California because we're benefiting from 5 years of trial and error, and hopefully it's exponential growth, right? Because of that. So it's very exciting.
What is it that makes mothers in particular so good at this?
Love, right? And commitment. I mean, this truly is, you feel it in your gut, right? And you can't go to sleep at night thinking about your children. So there's a level of commitment in that sense of, a number of mothers say to me that they got to a point where they realized that nobody else was going to fix this and that they had to do it. Who else is going to do it? Nobody's going to do it. And so they just have to go in there. And there's a fearlessness when you're fighting for somebody else that I think allows you to take some incredible risks. And then there's a whole modeling. So this involves going out of your comfort zone to some extent, which is incredibly rewarding because you find out you can do these things and you learn, and it's a transformational experience. But what gives people the courage is the love they have for their kids.
Courage and motivation to stay with it.
Right. So the number of times that I have felt overwhelmed, and my daughter has actually said to me, "You can't give up." I mean, she said that to me. She says that to me on a regular basis.
Wow.
Not that I think about giving up, but I do. I mean, this is hard.
It's discouraging sometimes, yeah.
It is. I mean, it feels, when you see what's happening with, the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, I've been at this for 10 years, and, the numbers are going the wrong way. So at the same time, I've seen like how much the movement has grown, but they don't have the choice. And I think that's one of the things I loved about working with students was they have a clarity, right? Like we can sort of, I think as older people, afford to second guess ourselves, but when, this is your future and there's no alternative, it's a whole different thing.
I hope you get a chance to write that organizing manual. It's going to be a bestseller.
Because it could be used by lots of other organizations, too, not just Mothers Out Front.
We do have it, and it's a constant, work in progress, but it's actually on our website at mothersoutfront.org. You need to be signed up to our email list to have access to it, but it is there, and it features, it's completely built around the Massachusetts gas leaks case study. And so it, basically tells the story of how they went from, two moms to having an impact in the state legislature to get the utilities to consider gas leaks as an environmental threat for the first time, and then sort of all the organizing practices that are attached to going from 0 to 60.
We hope you've enjoyed this extended interview cut. Please be sure to check it out in context in the prior Episode 3, Learning in Community with Mothers Out Front.